I don't see emotions as being the enemies of reason. Unless emotion and reason function together, Nietzsche showed this very powerfully, you don't have great art.
Let us begin with the opening affirmative statement.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. I came across a fascinating debate between Dr. Peter Kreeft, who I'm sure many of you know if you watch this channel, and Dr. David Boonin, if I'm saying his name correctly, from the University of Colorado. He presents a very unusual and unique view of abortion. So I think that this debate it's very fascinating, and I think it's going to be very informative. So please be sure to like and subscribe and consider supporting the mission of my wife and I. There's a GoFundMe link in the description below. All right, let's start with Dr. Boonin's kind of main thesis, main argument, and then we'll kind of build up from there.
I think I should start with just sort of a quick warning. I have this habit of answering questions indirectly. And so with respect to tonight's topic, when I think of the problem of abortion, I think the fundamental question is basically this: under what conditions, if any, does the fetus have the right, morally speaking, to make use of the woman's body if the woman doesn't want the fetus to be using her body?
So if you didn't catch what he was saying, it's this. His view is that a baby has a right to life, but a baby doesn't have a right to be kept alive if the mother, as another autonomous individual with individual rights, decides not to keep this other individual, this baby, alive. He then explains it in an analogy, so let's go ahead and see how he explains it.
Suppose that while Chad was asleep, someone on my behalf hooked him up to the bone marrow extraction process, and so when he wakes up, he discovers, right, that bone marrow is being provided from his body to my body, okay? And what he discovers is if he unplugs himself from this process because he doesn't want his body to be used to keep me alive, that's going to kill me. Okay, that's a case in which Chad is killing me. I do have a right to life, okay? But there's something very idiosyncratic about the way he's killing me. He's killing me by depriving me of life support that I do not have the right to in the first place, okay? At least according to all of you, or virtually all of you, at the outset of my first set of comments, right? So the key claim behind this argument is, and let me just repeat this, the right to life is not the same thing as the right to be kept alive. The right to life is not the same thing as the right to life support. The right to life does not entail the right to life support. If it did, then because I have the right to life, I would have the right to his bone marrow.
Okay, so in this analogy, Chad is like a mother, right? Or Chad is the mother. And he wakes up, he's just shocked. He wakes up and he finds that there's somebody tethered to him, and that person is extracting his bone marrow. And so all mothers, I guess, are like just shocked to find out that they're pregnant and that they have another human being tethered to them that is sucking out their bone marrow and taking and killing them. Okay. So as you can see, this analogy is very, very odd. It doesn't make sense of what pregnancies actually are. So let's see how Dr. Peter Kreeft responds to this.
Two things strike me. One is not surprising. The other is, the thing that's surprising is that my opponent admits my three premises and admits that abortion is killing someone with a right to life, and yet seems to say that sometimes it's not wrong to deprive someone of an inherent and fundamental right if that person is innocent. The other thing that didn't surprise me, but strikes me, is how all of his cases, all of his parallels, all of his arguments from analogy, I think unlike mine, with the overcoat and the shooting in the bush and so on, are not natural but unnatural. The thing that struck me when I first read Judith Jarvis Thompson's famous article, The Defense of Abortion, which is very similar to his bone marrow case. In this case, it's a violinist whose life depends on the woman being hooked up to a continuous blood transfusion in the hospital, is how utterly unnatural it is, how it isn't parallel. It's an argument from analogy, and the analogy doesn't work. To use the famous feminist argument, it's like comparing a fish and a bicycle. You asked the question, when does the fetus have a right to use the woman's body? What a strange way to describe pregnancy. one person using another's body. If that is what pregnancy is, then every pregnancy violates the categorical imperative, because we should not use other persons.
Ouch. And this is the fundamental flaw in the argument, I think, from Dr. David Boonin. You see, his analogy doesn't make sense of how to understand what abortion is in pregnancy and life in the womb and such. It's a very unnatural way of thinking about pregnancy. So the analogy doesn't really work. And it doesn't work because we don't actually think that that is the way that things are. Commonsensically, we know that a pregnancy is not a baby using its mother. We have to kind of concoct or create that environment from a philosophy that's not commonsensical. And even more, I was thinking about it in this way. If we take Dr. David Boonin's worldview, imagine the government. Imagine a government saying, okay, you all are individuals and you have rights. But in the moment that we think that you as individuals have rights are using our system and we have rights too, then we can just take away your Social Security. We can just take away your health care because we have rights too. You see what I'm saying? It's like saying, okay, you have rights, I have rights, but my rights trump your rights.
Let me say a little bit about this natural versus unnatural business. Here's what is true. I presented a series of examples, most of which in one degree or another were artificial rather than natural. Okay, so my question is, why should that matter? Okay, it can matter depending on the purposes that the examples are used for, right? In my case, the examples were used to motivate a general moral principle. The general moral principle still seems to be correct. In particular, having a right to life is not the same as having a right to be kept alive by someone else. Having a right to life does not entail having the right to be kept alive by someone else. As long as you accept those claims, the fact that they arose from an artificial rather than a natural example strikes me as not morally relevant. Somewhat more specifically, here's a kind of objection that potentially, I think, is a reasonable objection to arguments based on hypothetical artificial cases. Sometimes artificial cases are such that our intuitions are unclear. The case is so artificial, so science fiction-ish, time travel, et cetera, that we're not really sure how we respond. My experience has been that that's not the case with these sorts of examples. Even though it's a very fanciful situation where Chad wakes up and discovers that he's been plugged into a machine that's pumping his blood marrow into my body, almost all of us still have a very strong, clear, intuitive reaction. Chad has the right to unplug himself. He has the right to discontinue providing life support to me despite the fact that that will bring about my death. Even though I'm a person and I have a right to life, it does not follow that I have the right to be kept alive by him. I'll make one other quick comment about that and then try to get to a few of these other points. The other quick comment is a little bit less defensive and a little bit more constructive. I think, in fact, there's a very good reason to argue from artificial cases rather than natural cases. Natural cases tend to elicit in most of us emotional responses of a certain sort. Okay? For some, the emotional response might be one of valuing the pregnancy, wanting the pregnancy to continue. For others, it might be an emotional response of caring about women not being oppressed and thinking reproductive freedom is important to avoid oppression and so forth. So I think it's actually better, from a philosophical point of view, to set those cases aside and focus on abstract cases where most of us can be more dispassionate and objective. And if in those cases we find, look, it just seems clear a right to life does not mean a right to be kept alive, then what we ought to do is take that lesson that we've learned in the clear, dispassionate, objective cases and then apply that lesson to the case where many of us on both sides of the issue, I think, are inclined to let our emotions get involved.
And his emotions are not getting involved. Okay, here comes Dr. Peter Kreeft to save the day.
I'm glad I saved some time, because this is, I think, when I will take it, because we're into deep philosophical principles here. We're not just arguing about rules and cases. Two things. First, a very specific logical question, which can be answered very quickly. When is it right to kill a baby? You admit that once the baby's born, its right to life trumps even the mother's convenience. She can put it up for adoption. You don't justify infanticide. All right. If infanticide is wrong and abortion is not, then at what point does killing the baby become wrong? When the umbilical cord is cut so that it's the doctor's scissors that gives the baby the right to live? Or is it more and more wrong to kill a baby as the pregnancy wears on? Not because the baby is bigger or approximates what we are more, but because the baby is getting closer and closer to independence. But that too is a matter of degree. How can, whether it's right to kill a person with a right to life or not, depend upon something that's a matter of degree? That's my first question. But my deeper question involves some deeper philosophical principles here. And I think I now understand what divides us on foundational grounds. My fundamental challenge was these examples of yours are all unnatural. And your fundamental answer was, okay, that's not so bad, because I wasn't arguing by a kind of a direct analogy. I was arguing in order to prove a general principle. So however artificial these examples are, if your agreement with these examples logically entails your agreement with a general principle, and then if in turn that general principle can be used to justify abortion, then logically you have granted the right to abortion. I think you're confusing induction with abstraction here. I think these unnatural examples do not convince us of the general principle, and that my natural examples do, because the natural examples can be understood to be relevant, whereas the unnatural examples can't. The difference between induction and abstraction is that induction is a purely logical procedure, which a computer can do, whereas abstraction is a specifically human act of understanding. You can abstract human nature from human beings, or the nature of grapefruits from grapefruits, or the nature of triangles from different kinds of triangles, but that's an immediate first act of the mind act, which computers can't do. A second connected difference is, I think, the relation between reason and emotion. These natural cases do elicit from us an immediate instinctive emotional response, which the artificial ones don't, and therefore the artificial ones are better from your point of view. I think they're worse from my point of view. I don't see emotions as irrational. I find emotions revelatory. We have emotions about things. To use an example I gave a moment ago, if you slap me in the face and I smile and say thank you, that's an emotion, but it's revelatory of something. It's revelatory that I'm a masochist. I don't see emotions as being the enemies of reason. Unless emotion and reason function together, Nietzsche showed this very powerfully, you don't have great art. You don't have love. You don't have religion. In all the most important human areas, we don't separate these two things. There are times when we do want to separate them, especially in science. If the laboratory worker is in love with his guinea pigs, he's not going to cut them up. But I don't think we should treat women as guinea pigs and cut up their our emotional response versus our rational response in that way. We can distinguish them, but I think we have to bring in our emotional response as very important and relevant data.
All right, and there you have it. What you could see is two radically different worldviews and two radically different ways of approaching a subject. Um, I think just to conclude, what's the most commonsensical view here? And I think that that is what we always need to get back to. It doesn't make any sense to see a baby as using a woman's body. It just doesn't make sense to me. I don't see pregnancy in that way. I don't think it's a tenable philosophical presupposition to have that there are two autonomous individuals within this scenario and both have the right to life. But if one is basically sucking and killing the other, that person has a right to unhinge. That's not a natural way of seeing what a pregnancy is. Furthermore, if and Dr. Peter Kreeft points this out, if that worldview is held, it doesn't stop at the moment that a baby becomes, outside of the womb. It doesn't stop when it actually does become, in a very physical sense, disconnected from a mother because that baby is still completely and utterly dependent upon that mother for, nursing and such. So then does that philosophical principle still follow in the sense of, okay, well, they both have the right to life, but even now outside of the womb, because the mother is an autonomous individual and this other person is literally sucking life out of them, they have the right to deny that right? You see, the problem here is it's such a hyper individualism that says that the moment that an individual is requiring dependence upon another individual, the individual in the hierarchical superior position has the right to say no because it has rights to the lesser individual, and that, my friends, is not a worldview that is tenable. As I bring out with the idea of the government. Imagine a government saying, "Okay, we're here and, yeah, we have to run everything, but and all of you have individual rights, but the moment that your individual rights, hinder, or start taking too much away from what the government is doing, then the government can basically say, well, we are superior and we have rights over you.' It doesn't it's a corrupt power move. It's not tenable." All right, this was a very fascinating clip. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.